The storm raged outside, a brutal mix of rain and wind that howled through the trees. Inside his secluded cabin, Clint Barton sat by the window, the flickering light of a fire casting long shadows across the room. He wasn't a man who spent much time thinking about the past. His life had always been about the next fight, the next mission. But tonight was different. Tonight, something felt off. A loud crash echoed through the night, followed by the distinct thud of something massive hitting the ground. Clint's hand instinctively reached for his bow, his trained senses already on high alert. His eyes narrowed as he scanned the surrounding woods, the night cloaking the world in shadow. There it was again, a figure stumbling through the rain, almost like a blur in the storm. Clint didn't hesitate. He grabbed his jacket, quickly slipping out the back door, his boots sinking into the muddy earth as he sprinted toward the sound. A low growl cut through the air, a sound that was neither human nor animal. He froze. The silhouette was getting closer, and there was no doubt now. This was no ordinary person. Then he saw her, a towering figure, her green skin slick with rain, her muscles rippling with power and tension. She stumbled forward, leaning heavily against the trees, her breath ragged and uneven. Clint's heart skipped a beat, not from fear, but from something deeper, something primal that tugged at him. She was different. She was a force, yet she looked so vulnerable in that moment. "Hey," Clint called, stepping forward cautiously. "Are you all right?" The woman's eyes, wide and wild, flickered toward him. For a brief second, Clint thought he saw a flicker of recognition, followed by an undeniable intensity. Her teeth clenched, her body trembling as if fighting against something deep inside. Then, as if the world itself were unraveling around her, she collapsed into the mud with a painful grunt. Clint rushed forward, adrenaline pushing him to act. She didn't resist as he pulled her to her feet, her massive frame surprisingly light in his grasp. Her green eyes locked onto his, and in that instant, Clint saw something he hadn't expected. Fear. Fear that didn't belong to a person with her strength, her power. "Come inside," Clint said, his voice softer than he intended. "You need shelter." The woman, clearly struggling, nodded weakly. Her legs were shaking beneath her, but she managed to stay upright. Clint half carried her back toward the cabin, his mind racing. Who was she? What kind of creature was she? And why did he feel this overwhelming need to protect her, to make sure she was safe? Once inside, Clint moved quickly, laying her down on the couch. Her breath was shallow, her face pale under the storm's cold grip. As he wiped the rain from her brow, Clint felt something strange settle in his chest. This wasn't just about survival. There was something more here, something that made him question everything he knew. "What happened to you?" he asked quietly, kneeling by her side. She blinked, trying to focus on him through the haze. Her voice was hoarse, barely audible, but it carried a weight Clint couldn't ignore. I'm not what you think I am." Before he could press her further, she winced, her face twisting in pain, as if something inside her was clawing to get out. Clint's instincts screamed at him to move, to protect her, but he stayed rooted to the spot, unsure of what she was facing, or what it meant for him. Then, in a sudden, uncontrollable burst, she growled in frustration, her body trembling violently, as if a storm of her own was breaking free from within. Clint watched, paralyzed by confusion and a rising sense of dread, as her skin began to shimmer with an unnatural glow. She was in agony, her body caught between two worlds, and Clint had no idea what he had just invited into his life. And as the storm raged outside, Clint Barton found himself in the center of something far darker and far more dangerous than he could have ever imagined. The hours that followed were a blur of strange intensity. Clint watched her, unsure of what to do. The woman, She-Hulk, as he had begun to realize, rested on his couch, her breathing steadying as the storm outside subsided. But the storm inside her was far from over. Clint stayed nearby, a quiet observer, but never far from her side. He had a feeling she wasn't just recovering from an injury. There was something deeper at work here, something far more dangerous. Her green eyes flickered open slowly, confusion clouding her features before they settled on Clint. "Where am I?" Her voice was hoarse but strong, like it had been through something unimaginable. "You're in my cabin," Clint said softly, his hand instinctively hovering near his bow. "I found you out there. You were hurt." She nodded slightly, a weak grimace tugging at her lips as she sat up, her massive form seeming far too large for the small space. Clint felt the heat of her presence, a force that made the air between them thick with tension. "I didn't mean to intrude," she whispered, her words dripping with exhaustion. But there was something else there, something behind her eyes that Clint couldn't ignore. He had seen many things in his years as a hero, but nothing like this. This wasn't just a woman in need of help. It was a presence that shook him to his core. "You're not intruding," Clint replied, forcing a calmness into his voice that he didn't entirely feel. "Just take it easy. You're safe here." For a long moment, there was silence, the kind that presses against your chest. Neither of them spoke, but the air was thick with something unsaid, something between them, something Clint couldn't quite place. He knew he should probably get some answers, ask her what was happening to her, why she had seemed so different, but he couldn't bring himself to break the stillness. She-Hulk wasn't just any hero. She was a force, a power that could change the very fabric of the world. Yet here she was, vulnerable, unsure, and fragile in ways he hadn't expected. "Thank you," she said after a long pause, her voice softer now, filled with a quiet gratitude. Clint nodded, his fingers tracing the edge of his bow, the familiar weight of it grounding him. "No need to thank me. I couldn't just leave you out there." She glanced at him, her green eyes lingering on his face for a moment too long. For a brief, electric moment, the world seemed to pause. He felt it, an undeniable pull, like a magnet between them. A dangerous pull. It wasn't just gratitude. It wasn't just the storm raging in the distance. It was something primal, something raw and untamable. He had no idea how it happened, but as she looked at him, Clint felt his heart race, his breath catching in his throat. Something about the way her eyes locked onto his sent a jolt through him. A connection that was more than physical. It was something deep, something ancient. Her lips parted, and for a fleeting moment, Clint thought she might speak again, but she closed her eyes instead, letting out a shaky breath. Her body trembled, and Clint noticed the way her hands clenched at her sides, like she was struggling with something inside herself. I don't know how much longer I can keep this under control," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "The storm inside me, it's getting stronger. I'm not sure how long I'll be able to stay myself." Clint's stomach tightened. He knew that feeling, being consumed by something you couldn't control. It was a feeling he lived with every day. But this was different. This wasn't just some fight or mission. It was a force of nature. "You don't have to do this alone," Clint said, the words slipping out before he could stop them. He didn't know why he said it. Maybe it was the storm outside. Maybe it was the storm inside her. Or maybe it was the way she looked at him, like she was about to shatter and needed someone to hold her together. She didn't answer immediately, but Clint saw it in her eyes. The conflict, the hesitation. She wanted to trust him, but there was something about her, something dark and untamed, that warned him to stay away. The room grew warmer, the tension thickening in the air. And in that moment, Clint knew that the path they were walking together, however uncertain, would be far more dangerous than either of them had prepared for. Clint sat across from her, watching in tense silence as the storm outside intensified once again. The wind howled through the trees, pushing rain against the windows with a violent urgency. Inside, the warmth of the cabin only heightened the tension between them. The air was thick with something neither of them could name, but both felt, something primal and dangerous, like a storm that had yet to fully break. Jennifer Walters, She-Hulk, shifted restlessly on the couch. Her breath came in sharp bursts, her body seeming to vibrate with an energy Clint could barely comprehend. He couldn't help but notice the subtle flicker in her eyes, the way her green skin seemed to shimmer in the light, as if a power was building beneath her surface, desperate to escape. "You're still not feeling well?" Clint asked, his voice quieter than usual, as if speaking too loudly might push her over the edge. She looked at him, a flicker of something unreadable in her gaze. "I'm trying to keep it together," she said, her voice tight, almost strained. "But it's not easy. Every second, it's harder to hold it back." Her hands trembled as she clenched them into fists, her knuckles whitening. Clint saw the struggle in her, saw the war between the woman he'd come to care for and the raging force inside her. It was a fight he recognized, the kind of fight that made even the strongest heroes feel powerless. He knew that look, that tension. He had seen it in his own reflection after battles that left him bruised, broken, and alone. But this was different. Jennifer wasn't just fighting physical pain. She was fighting something darker, something she couldn't control. "Jennifer." Clint's voice softened, his concern bubbling up despite the danger he felt from being near her. "I don't know what's going on inside you, but you don't have to face this alone." For a moment, she was still. Then her expression hardened, and she turned away from him. "You don't understand," she whispered, her words barely audible over the rising wind. "This is something I've been running from my whole life. It's not just anger or pain. It's something else, something I can't stop." Clint's heart tightened. He wanted to reach out, wanted to tell her that she wasn't alone. But the way she spoke, so guarded, so closed off, made him hesitate. He could see the fear in her eyes, the fear of losing herself to the thing inside her. And he realized, with a cold shiver down his spine, that the thing inside her might not just destroy her. It could destroy everything around her. The air in the cabin seemed to thicken, charged with a sudden tension. Clint felt it before he saw it, a flicker of green in her eyes, a flash of something raw and untamed. Her muscles bulged beneath her skin, as if they were straining against a force that wanted to break free. Clint's breath hitched. He could see the battle inside her now, clear as day. It wasn't just physical. It was like something deep inside her soul was clawing its way out. "Jennifer, please, fight it," Clint said, his voice rough with urgency. His instincts screamed at him to do something, anything, to help her before she lost herself completely. But Jennifer's face twisted with frustration, her eyes darkening. "You don't get it," she snapped, standing up suddenly. The force of her movement sent a shock through the cabin. "I can't just turn this off. It's in me. It's always been in me." Her body started to tremble uncontrollably as she took a few steps back, away from Clint. The room seemed to pulse with energy, as if the very air around her was alive with power. Clint stood, his bow slipping into his grip without a thought. But he didn't aim it at her. He couldn't. He wasn't here to fight her. He was here to help. Jennifer's eyes flashed with an intensity that almost burned. "I can't stay here," she said, her voice shaking. "I can't risk hurting you." But before Clint could respond, the cabin door suddenly slammed open. The wind screamed inside, whipping rain and leaves into the room. The force of it sent Clint stumbling backward, and he saw, in that split second, the change in Jennifer. Her body was no longer just struggling, it was transforming. Her muscles bulged, her skin deepened in hue. Her green eyes, once filled with fear, were now filled with something else. Something fierce, something untamable. Clint took a step back, his heart racing. Jennifer looked at him, her gaze haunted. "Run," she whispered, a final warning. But Clint didn't move. Not yet. And as the storm outside howled louder, he knew that whatever happened next, they were no longer just two people trapped in a cabin. They were standing on the edge of something far greater, something that could break them both. And he wasn't sure if he was ready for it. The storm outside raged, but inside the cabin, it was a different kind of tempest. A war between man and beast, light and shadow, control and chaos. Clint stood frozen, his heart pounding in his chest as he faced the transformation unfolding before him. Jennifer, once vulnerable and uncertain, was no longer the same woman. The She-Hulk before him was an unstoppable force, a creature of raw power and untamed fury, her body glowing with an otherworldly energy that filled the small room with an electric hum. Her eyes, now a piercing green, locked onto his, and Clint could feel the heat from her presence radiating through the space. It wasn't just her size, her strength, or the overwhelming power that seemed to pulse from her every movement. It was the way she looked at him, like she was caught between two worlds, two identities, and neither one fully hers. "You need to leave," Jennifer's voice rumbled, low and raw. The words were a plea, but they were also a warning. "I can't hold this back for much longer." Clint didn't move, though every instinct screamed at him to get out, to protect himself, to survive. But something deeper than fear kept him rooted to the spot. This wasn't just about him anymore. This wasn't just about her either. It was something else, something that was growing between them, something undeniable. He stepped closer, his voice steady, though his pulse thundered in his ears. "I'm not leaving. Not without you." Her gaze flickered, a flicker of something, vulnerability, maybe, or desperation, before she clenched her fists at her sides. "You don't understand. I'm not the same. Not anymore." She looked down at her massive hands, her fingers trembling, as if they were trying to claw their way free from the inner storm. "This thing inside me, it's too strong. I can't stop it." Clint took another step forward, his heart in his throat. He had faced impossible odds before, battled gods, monsters, and aliens, but nothing had ever felt like this. This wasn't a fight he could win with arrows or tactics. This was about understanding. This was about reaching her before she lost herself entirely. "I know what it's like to fight something inside you," Clint said, his voice softer now. "I know what it feels like to lose control." Jennifer's gaze snapped up to meet his again, her breath shallow. There was something raw in her eyes, something that made Clint's chest ache. "You don't understand," she repeated, but this time, there was a tremor in her voice. "I'm dangerous, Clint. You think you can help me, but you can't. I'm going to hurt you." He shook his head, his voice firm. "No, you're not a monster. You're just struggling. But you're not alone in this." For a long moment, they stood there, locked in a silent battle of wills. The storm outside howled louder, rattling the windows, but inside the cabin, it was like the world had narrowed to just the two of them. Clint's words hung in the air, a fragile bridge between their worlds. Then, without warning, Jennifer's body shuddered, her green eyes flashing with a ferocity that made the room feel like it was vibrating. She let out a low growl, her teeth gritting as the transformation accelerated. Her muscles expanded, her skin turning darker, more intense, as the beast within her clawed its way to the surface. Clint's breath caught in his throat as he watched her, helpless, the She-Hulk he had come to know, strong, fierce, and caring, was slipping away, replaced by something darker, something that could destroy everything in its path. "Jennifer, please." Clint reached out to her, his voice desperate. "Don't let it win." For a heartbeat, there was nothing. No movement, no sound, just the heavy silence between them. Then, in a sudden burst of power, Jennifer's form exploded in a flash of energy, knocking Clint back against the wall. The force of it sent the room spinning, the air thick with the force of her transformation. Clint shook his head, trying to clear the fog, his heart racing as he pushed himself to his feet. But it was too late. Jennifer was gone. The woman he had seen, vulnerable, afraid, and unsure, was lost beneath the rage that now consumed her. The beast inside her had fully taken control. She stood, towering over him, her eyes wild with fury, her body crackling with uncontrollable energy. Clint's chest tightened as he looked up at her, knowing, deep down, that the woman he cared for was still there, but buried beneath the surface, barely hanging on. And in that moment, Clint realized that this wasn't just a battle for Jennifer's soul. It was a battle for his own as well. Because if he couldn't reach her, if he couldn't help her regain control, they would both be lost in the storm she had become. The room trembled under the weight of Jennifer's transformation. Clint could feel the heat radiating from her, the raw power that crackled through the air like electricity. Her body had swollen with muscle, her skin deepened into a darker shade of green, and her eyes blazed with an uncontained fury. The She-Hulk he had known was gone, replaced by an uncontrollable force, a storm of emotions and rage that Clint had no idea how to calm. But he wasn't about to give up. Not now. Not when she needed him the most. Clint took a slow, deliberate step forward, his hand outstretched toward her, his voice steady but laced with urgency. "Jennifer, listen to me. You're still in there. I know you are." Her head snapped toward him, and for a split second, he saw the flicker of recognition in her eyes. But it was gone as quickly as it came, replaced by a flash of violent intent. She snarled, her jaw tightening as her massive hands clenched into fists. "Stay back, Clint," she growled, her voice deep and guttural. "I warned you. I'm not the woman you knew." Clint's heart raced, but he held his ground, refusing to step back. "You're more than this. This isn't who you are. You're not a monster, Jennifer. You never were." For a brief moment, the storm inside her seemed to still. Her breathing slowed, and her chest rose and fell with a steady rhythm. Clint took another step closer, his eyes locked on hers. He had to reach her, had to find some way to break through the chaos inside her. But then, without warning, she screamed, a primal, raw sound that tore through the cabin and sent Clint stumbling back. The force of her cry rattled the walls, and the ground beneath them seemed to shake as if the earth itself were reacting to her rage. Clint barely had time to react as Jennifer surged forward, her massive body moving with a speed that belied her size. Before he could dodge, she reached out and grabbed him by the shoulders, lifting him off the ground with ease. His breath caught in his throat as she held him in the air, her grip tightening. "Clint, Jennifer began, her voice shaking with a mix of anger and despair. "I can't stop this. I can't control it anymore." Clint's mind raced, his body screaming for air as she squeezed him tighter. But he refused to panic. This wasn't about brute strength or tactics. This was about her. This was about reaching the woman beneath the monster. "Jennifer," Clint shouted, his voice breaking through the fury in the air. "You can control it. You have to believe that." She faltered, her green eyes flickering with doubt. For a moment, Clint saw the woman he had cared for, the one who had laughed, fought beside him, and shared moments of quiet understanding. That woman was still there, buried beneath the rage and the chaos, and he wasn't going to let go of that. "I'm not leaving you, Jennifer. I'm here. I'm not afraid of you," Clint said, his voice steady, despite the pounding in his chest. "You don't have to fight alone." There was a long, agonizing silence. Then, slowly, Jennifer's grip loosened, her shaking hands lowering Clint back to the floor. She staggered back, her breath ragged, her body trembling as the storm inside her raged against her control. Clint didn't move. He kept his distance, his eyes never leaving hers. "You don't have to fight this alone," he repeated, his words softer now, almost a whisper. Jennifer looked at him, her expression conflicted, torn between the beast and the woman beneath. The air was thick with the tension between them, the storm inside her still building, but for a brief moment, Clint could see it, the flicker of the woman she had been. I don't know if I can keep it in," Jennifer whispered, her voice breaking. "I don't know if I can control it, Clint." "You don't have to," Clint said, taking another step toward her, his gaze unwavering. "You don't have to fight it alone anymore. I'm here." For the first time since the transformation had begun, Jennifer's eyes softened. The rage that had clouded her gaze seemed to dissipate, if only for a moment. Her body still shook with the residual power, but there was a light, a flicker of something human in her eyes. Clint knew the battle wasn't over. It wouldn't be over until she found the strength to reconcile the parts of herself that were fighting for dominance. But for the first time, he could see the path forward, together. And as the storm raged on outside, inside the cabin, something shifted. Something fragile but real. A spark of hope. The storm outside had reached its peak, the wind howling like a wild animal, shaking the very foundation of the cabin. But inside, the air had grown still, thick with unspoken words and quiet tension. Clint and Jennifer stood in the midst of it, surrounded by the fragile remains of a connection that had almost been shattered. Jennifer's massive form trembled, her body still radiating power, but something in her eyes had changed. The flickering green glow that had once held nothing but rage had softened. It wasn't gone. No, it never fully would be. But for the first time, Clint saw a glimpse of the woman beneath the beast. She wasn't just a force of destruction. She was someone he knew, someone he cared about. Clint took a cautious step toward her, his heart pounding in his chest. She was still massive, still dangerous, but the anger in her had subsided, replaced by something that seemed far more fragile. She stood there, looking like she was holding herself together, with every ounce of willpower she had left. "I didn't mean for this to happen," Jennifer said, her voice hoarse, laced with both regret and fear. "I didn't want to hurt anyone." Clint's eyes softened as he stepped closer, his voice steady. I know you didn't. But you're not a monster, Jennifer. You never were." She shook her head, the weight of her inner turmoil visible in the tightness of her features. "You don't understand. I can feel it. This power. It's too much for me to control. I'm scared, Clint." The confession hung in the air between them, raw and vulnerable, and Clint felt his heart ache. He understood fear. He had faced it countless times on the battlefield, faced it within himself. But this was something entirely different. Jennifer wasn't just afraid of the power inside her. She was afraid of losing herself to it, of becoming something she couldn't come back from. "I get it," Clint said softly. "I've been there too. Feeling like the storm inside you is too big to control, but you don't have to face it alone." Her eyes locked onto his, and for a brief moment, the world outside seemed to fall away. The cabin, the storm, the chaos, all of it faded, and it was just the two of them, standing in the aftermath of something they couldn't name. "You don't understand," Jennifer repeated, her voice quieter now, almost pleading. "I'm not just a hero anymore. I'm something dangerous. What if I hurt you? What if I hurt someone else?" Clint's gaze never wavered. He stepped closer, his presence steady and calm. "I've fought alongside you before, Jennifer. I know what you're capable of. I've seen you be strong, not just with your strength, but with your heart. Don't let fear control you. You're more than what's inside you. You're Jennifer Walters." The words seemed to reach her, but just as quickly, a flicker of doubt crossed her face. She took a step back, her eyes downcast. "What if I can't control it anymore? What if it gets worse?" Clint reached out, gently taking her arm, his touch warm and grounding. "Then we'll fight it together," he said with quiet certainty. "You don't have to carry this burden alone. I'm not going anywhere." Jennifer's breath hitched as she looked at him, her green eyes shimmering with unshed tears. For the first time since the storm had begun, she didn't seem like a woman on the brink of losing everything. She seemed like a person, like someone who had been fighting to keep hold of herself. For a long moment, they stood in silence, the storm outside continuing its relentless assault. But inside, something had shifted. Jennifer's breathing steadied, and her body stopped trembling so violently. Clint could feel the change. Something had clicked, a moment of clarity, a fragile but real peace in the chaos. "I don't know if I can ever truly be rid of it," Jennifer whispered, her voice soft, almost hesitant. but I don't want to lose myself in it." Clint gave her a small, reassuring smile. "You won't. Not as long as I'm here." Jennifer's lips quivered, and she took a shaky breath, her gaze softening. "Thank you." Clint squeezed her arm, his voice warm but firm. "You don't have to thank me. We're in this together, remember?" She nodded slowly, her shoulders relaxing just a fraction as she let out a sigh of relief. For the first time in what felt like forever, Jennifer allowed herself to hope, just a little. Hope that maybe, just maybe, she wasn't as alone as she had thought. And as the storm outside began to lose its fury, a new kind of stillness settled over the cabin. One that wasn't defined by the threat of danger, but by the promise of something stronger. A bond. A chance. The storm outside had quieted to a gentle rumble, the wind no longer battering the cabin with its fury. The air inside, however, was still charged with an intensity that neither Clint nor Jennifer could quite shake. The battle wasn't over, not yet. But something had shifted, something had changed between them, in the space they shared. The tension, though still palpable, had softened, replaced by something fragile but real. Jennifer sat by the window, her massive green form hunched slightly as she stared out into the rain-soaked wilderness. Her eyes, once filled with violent energy, now appeared distant, lost in thought. She was calm, but there was a quiet war raging behind her gaze, one that Clint knew he couldn't fight for her. This was her fight. It always had been. Clint sat on the opposite side of the room, watching her, giving her the space she needed. He understood now that forcing her to talk would only drive her further away. But he couldn't help the worry gnawing at him. She was still holding on to something. Something heavy, something she couldn't yet let go of. "I'm not afraid of you," Clint said, his voice breaking the silence. He spoke softly, but there was conviction in his tone. "But I think you're afraid of yourself." Jennifer didn't turn around at first, her shoulders tense under her weight. But Clint could see the subtle shift in her posture, the slow release of tension. Finally, she spoke, her voice quiet, as though testing the sound of her own words. "I'm not afraid of the power," she said slowly. "I'm afraid of what happens when I lose control, of becoming something I can't come back from." Clint's heart tightened. He knew what it was like to feel that way. The fear of losing yourself, of becoming something unrecognizable. He'd seen it in himself countless times, the way the darkness crept in when he let it. The difference was that he'd had people around him, people who believed in him when he didn't believe in himself. And Jennifer had always fought alone. "I've been there," Clint said quietly, pushing himself off the chair and walking closer to her. "When you lose sight of who you are, when you're not sure if you can come back. But the truth is, you don't have to do it alone. You have people who care about you." Jennifer finally turned to face him, her eyes searching his face for something. She seemed uncertain, unsure of whether she could trust him or trust herself. "You think I'm just going to be okay?" Her words were soft, tinged with doubt, but Clint could hear the vulnerability beneath them. She was asking for reassurance, even if she didn't know how to ask for it. Clint met her gaze steadily. "No. I don't think you'll ever be just okay, but I think you'll be stronger for it. I think you can learn how to live with it. Not as a curse, but as part of who you are. A part you control, not the other way around." There was a long pause, a silence that felt like it could stretch on forever. Jennifer's eyes held his, searching for any sign of weakness, any hint that Clint was offering false hope. But all she found was truth, raw, unshakable truth. And then, as if she had been holding her breath for hours, Jennifer exhaled slowly, the tension in her shoulders easing. "I don't know how to let go of the fear," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know if I can." Clint's heart ached as he stepped closer, his hand resting gently on her arm. "You don't have to let go of it all at once. Just take it one step at a time. I'm here. You're not alone in this." Jennifer's eyes softened, and for a moment, Clint saw it, the woman who had been hiding behind the fury, the fear, and the power. He saw the person who had fought for justice, who had sacrificed everything for those she loved. The beast might have been inside her, but it was not all that she was. "Thank you," Jennifer whispered, her voice barely audible, but filled with more emotion than Clint had ever heard from her. Clint gave her a small, reassuring smile. "No need to thank me. You don't have to carry this burden by yourself anymore." Jennifer closed her eyes, the weight of her own emotions pressing against her chest. She could feel the storm still swirling inside, could feel the power threatening to overtake her. But for the first time in what felt like forever, she didn't feel entirely alone. She didn't have to face the monster within by herself. As the rain slowed to a light drizzle outside, Clint stood by her side, a quiet understanding between them. There would still be challenges, still be battles to fight, within and without. But Jennifer knew, now, that she wasn't fighting alone. And that, for the first time, gave her a reason to believe that maybe, just maybe, she could survive the storm after all. The night had fallen quiet, save for the occasional crackle of the fire in the hearth. The storm outside had finally surrendered, its fury replaced by a peaceful calm. Inside the cabin, the air felt different, warmer, lighter, as if the storm had shifted something between Clint and Jennifer, something that had been shattered and was slowly being put back together, piece by fragile piece. Jennifer sat at the table, her massive green hands wrapped around a cup of warm tea. She hadn't been able to sleep, and neither had Clint. But the stillness between them didn't feel uncomfortable. It felt like something they could build on. Clint stood by the window, watching the remnants of the storm push past the mountains in the distance. The moon hung high above, casting pale light across the landscape, as if the night itself was holding its breath. In his reflection in the glass, he saw the weariness in his own eyes, the exhaustion from the battles they had fought, both against their enemies and against themselves. He didn't look at Jennifer often, but when he did, there was something different in the way he saw her. No longer just the She-Hulk, no longer just the powerful warrior. She was Jennifer Walters, a woman who had endured more than anyone should, a woman who had fought for so long and had never given up, even when the world seemed ready to tear her apart. Clint turned from the window, meeting her gaze. "You okay?" Jennifer's lips curled into a small smile, the first real one he'd seen in what felt like forever. She nodded, but there was a flicker of doubt in her eyes. "I think I will be." Clint walked over to the table, his movements slow, measured. "You don't have to have it all figured out right now," he said gently, sitting down across from her. "You don't have to know how to control it all. Not today. One step at a time, remember." Jennifer's smile widened, and for the first time in days, she looked at peace. Yeah, one step at a time. There was an intimacy in that moment, quiet, unspoken, but powerful. Jennifer wasn't looking for answers anymore. She wasn't trying to force herself into being something she couldn't be. She was allowing herself to be human, to feel, to heal. And for the first time, Clint realized that maybe, just maybe, the same applied to him. "I've spent so much of my life trying to fight everything. My past, my fears, this power," Jennifer murmured, her fingers tracing the rim of her cup. "But it's always been a part of me. I just couldn't see it until now." Clint's gaze softened. "I think we all spend our lives fighting pieces of ourselves. It's not easy to accept everything you are." The words hung in the air, a truth shared between them. They had both struggled with their identities, their place in the world, and the battles they fought, not just for others, but for themselves. Clint had fought for redemption, for peace, and Jennifer had fought to control a force inside her that threatened to overtake her. But they had found something in each other, a quiet understanding, an acceptance that made the journey a little less lonely. "Do you ever wonder if we're meant to be more than just the sum of our powers?" Jennifer asked, her voice thoughtful. Clint considered the question for a long moment, his brow furrowing as he looked at her. "Maybe we're meant to be more than just heroes, or soldiers, or fighters. Maybe we're meant to be people, to find something in the chaos, something worth fighting for." Jennifer leaned back in her chair, her gaze drifting to the flickering fire. "I think that's what I've been missing," she said softly. "The understanding that I'm not just this thing. I'm still me, even with all the power, even with all the rage." Clint nodded, his eyes locking onto hers. "You're not just that. You're Jennifer Walters, and that's more than enough." A heavy silence fell between them, but it was no longer awkward or filled with uncertainty. It was the kind of silence that came from understanding, from two people who had seen each other at their lowest and still chose to stand beside each other. Outside, the storm had passed completely, leaving nothing but the quiet aftermath. And in that stillness, Jennifer and Clint sat together, two warriors who had fought their own battles and had found something they hadn't expected: peace. A fragile peace, perhaps, but one that felt more solid than the chaos they had both endured. As the fire crackled and the night grew deeper, they knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be more battles, more challenges, more moments when they felt like they were losing control. But in this moment, there was something worth fighting for. A connection, a bond, something that was theirs alone. And for the first time, Jennifer felt a sense of hope stir in her chest, something that had been buried beneath the weight of fear and doubt for so long. Maybe she didn't have all the answers, but she wasn't alone anymore.